everybody. Good evening. I would like to welcome all of you to our school board meeting here tonight, and I know you're anxious to hear the exciting agenda that we have, but actually I think you're here for the spotlight, so that's great. So tonight we are going to kick off our meeting with our spotlight. We have two wonderful groups here tonight. Our championship synchro swim team. Welcome, synchro swim team. And our choir groups who won about everything in the state. So that was really wonderful. Welcome. And to kick things off tonight, Andy will meet me up at the podium and we will kick off with the synchro team. The way this works is Andy does the hard work, all the name calling, and I just get to shake hands.
Thank you for having me. I'm Andy Ewald. I'm the district's athletic director. None of our synchronized swimming coaches could be here tonight, so I am here. Our synchronized swimming team this year won their section. They finished third at state, and we were fortunate enough to have two swimmers be all-state swimmers. So they had quite a fine year and represented our school extremely, extremely well. So we will go through and say the names, and then you can come.
Join us up here.
Yep, come up here, get your certificate, shake our hands, and then we'll ask that afterwards the parents stand up and be recognized for all of their hard work, and we'll also take a group picture. So we'll start with Savannah Kajire. Alexandra Monson. Brooklyn Donaldson. Alyssa Strobel. Claire Beneke. Jean Marie Karstens. Paula Campos Gonzalez. Amelia Weiland. Ariana Thomas. Melanie Steiner. Zoe Peterson. Julia Nathan. Gabrielle Miller. Caitlin Cole. Aubrey Frank. Carolyn Goodall. Rose Evenson. Maya Liss. Carla Tapia Vizcarro. Claire Steffenhagen. Claire Olson. Hannah McDowell. Jenna Frank. Janet Holmes. Maria Knudsen. Beatrice Lenz. And Grace Steffenhagen.
Andy, I think you skipped over one in at the top. Emma Briac, second line.
No. Not on this list. That's fine. Emma Briac. Oh. So again, this is our synchronized swimming team that won their section, which is a huge accomplishment. They took third at state and 2 all-state swimmers. So they work extremely hard in and out of the pool. They do a great job in our strength and conditioning program, which I think has gone a long way in helping them become individually the swimmers they are and as a group the swimmers that they are. And they represent our school extremely, extremely well. So congratulations and thank you all for the hard work and effort and energy you put in.
Stay. 3 more for the parents.
1, 2, 3. Got it. Thanks, guys.
Okay, hold on, everybody. A couple more. All right. Thank you, girls. Congratulations.
And quickly, if we could just have the parents of those student athletes maybe stand up and be recognized. As much work and energy as the kids put in, the parents are the ones behind them carpooling and doing everything else under the sun. So thank you.
losing some swimmers here. Now John Muskowski will come up and present our spotlight on our choir.
Do this because you got to repeat people.
Oh, have you? Okay. Let's see. Okay, yeah, we have a lot of those. So why don't we just,
Do from here.
yeah, why
Yep,
don't we
'cause
just
I
do
can
it
let you
right
know.
from here? So you want to just walk
Sure.
down the names, and
Yep.
we'll just pass them out as we go.
And we're going to do it a little bit different. We've got a lot of multiple kids that got awards. And I just want to point out, since you're here, and I'm not going to take too much of your time, we did have 37 events that kids are involved in, and it was the night of April 18th. So it was the horrible snowstorm, and we still had that many kids that went, and it was in Eden Prairie. So really, really monumental that they showed up, which was a great thing. And there were 75, not 75 students, but 75 like student events that they were involved in. You know, like some had like 24 kids, some had 16. And that was the most that we've had in the last 5 years. So very, very impressive. So my hat's off to the kids and parents for supporting with that. So of the students that I know that are here, because we've got like multiple kids in it, I'm going to call their names and then have them come up and hopefully kind of leaf through and get their awards. So Allison Betcher. Yeah. Alex S. Mara Hathaway. Jane Henderson. Maggie O'Brien. Carly Quick. Nathan Robbins. Carlos Seguenza. And I just want to point out that Carlos did a duet, and Carlos's duet was tied for Best in Sight in the area where he sang, and unfortunately the judge gave it to the other person that was tied for Best in Sight. But anytime you tied for Best in Sight, huge, huge recognition. Sharon Morenga. And I want to point out Sharon is a freshman who got a superior, and that's kind of an unheard of thing, so kind of a big deal. Caitlin Scott. Connor Williams, also a freshman who got a superior. Isabel Gonzalez. Dave Herrera. Andrew Lindstrom. Rebecca Robbins. Jonah Resnick. Jonah is the other half of Carlos's duet that got it tied for Best in Sight, so great job. And have Caitlin Cole from Synchronized Swimming, multi-talented stayed. Now we're going to really leaf through. And that's it. Did I miss anybody? Cora, I don't have your thing here. I'm sorry. Cora Iverson, coming up. So parents and school board members, I just want to say that I am so appreciative of the support because I know a number of you send me emails asking when events are, and I don't always reply. I'm going to say that. But this past year has been a year where we did do kind of large undertakings. We did a concert version of Les Miserables, and we had gotten support from the St. Louis Park Education Foundation a number of years ago to try to get like kind of seed money so that it could be self-supporting. And I'm not going to tell you what we have in the bank, but it is more than enough for us now to be kind of on our own feet for purchasing the licensing and the royalties and hiring, directors and choreographers and stuff like that. So it's been a project that without, the school board support, with Bruce's support, who is kind of instrumental in kind of spearheading with the foundation to kind of get that off the ground, that gives kids another enriching opportunity that we kind of can kind of do ourselves now, which is kind of the whole point of it. And in addition to that, it's funded, I'm going to say at least $5,000 in helping defray the costs of the tours that we take. So that's been a really huge blessing for the kids and I think for the community as well. So thank you for your ongoing support. And I know that that trickles down to buildings as well. And so we feel the support at the building level too. So thank you, school board. Thank you, parents. Thank you, community. Yes, parents, if you could stand up, parents of these accomplished singers. Yes.
Hey, Cora, I'm not sure what happened, but I'll get your certificate.
Too late.
Like we should be in our section. Do I need to crowd for anyone? Everyone else is gonna swap.
Find a window.
We gotta squeeze together.
So maybe doing a third row.
It's too late now.
Maybe if I can get you four to come in the front
Ms.
over here.
Wisconsin, we can do it by section.
For you, Rebecca, Caitlin, like right over here. Let's switch it up a little bit.
It's low. It's in a ponytail. Still, it's large.
Everybody's back stand tall for second row, sprout it in just a little bit. There you go. 1, 2, 3 for me.
Cheese.
One more for me. 1, 2, 3. I'm gonna move out of the way.
Okay, stay for the parents.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone's gonna be looking somewhere else. Is that working? Are we good? We good?
Smile, everybody.
My head. Okay, we're good.
Thank you all. Congratulations. Great job.
John, I'll take this.
It should say best things.
We're responsible for Wednesday.
I'm gonna put my mama ring.
Okay, we are going to continue down our agenda tonight. Thank you all for coming. We have lost our crowd. So, all right.
But we still have an audience.
We still have a few spectators. Welcome, everyone. We've just had a wonderful spotlight with our synchro team and our choir, and now we'll have our call to order with the approval of the agenda. Our study session topics tonight are the school board announces the superintendent's contract, the Southwest Light Rail Project will present, the technology levy discussion will be presented tonight, the preliminary budget report will be presented, the health and safety annual report to MDE will also be presented. Our action items tonight are approval of the annual health and safety report to MDE, the approval of the resolution calling for an operating referendum in this fall of 2013, and then the resolution relating to the I'm sorry, that is the referendum for the operating referendum, and the approval of the new superintendent contract for Robert Metz. Communications and transmittals, and then we will adjourn. So it's a pretty chock-full agenda tonight, so may I have a motion to approve the agenda? Moved by Ken. Jim, second? Okay, thank you. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Okay, we have a 6-0 vote. And so the next item will be the announcement of the superintendent contract. And what we have is we have discussed the contract with Rob Metz. He has agreed to the contract, and that signing will take place tonight with the approval of the school board in the action agenda. So we will move on ahead right now with the other items on the agenda. The Southwest Light Rail Project will now be discussed. Sandy Salen will introduce our presenters tonight. And Sandy, thank you.
Thank you. We have invited the staff from the light rail to discuss some questions that and further clarification of the presentation that they provided to us at the last board meeting. And we have with us, again, Chris Weyer. He's is the project director from the Southwest LRT, as well as Jim Alexander, who is a director of transit system designs and engineering. And with that, I'll leave it to them to present to us their presentation.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Mr. Chair, board members. Appreciate you asking us to come back so we can give you some further detail on the project. I know what we gave you was pretty high level last time, so my colleague Jim Alexander will give you a lot more detail on some of the work that's been done here in the last few months. I also want to just note that we still have a lot of options on the table, so he'll be exploring those. We'll try to keep this moving along, but we do have a lot of material for you, and we'll hopefully with these packets, if you have further questions, we can get back to you on those as well. I also just want to kind of give you a real quick background on Jim and our experiences. I've been working on light rail projects. Well, I worked on Central Corridor. Prior to that, I did a little bit of work in Hiawatha, but then also worked on the North Star project till that opened in 2009, working on the construction of that line up to Big Lake, and then worked as the Director of Design and Construction on Central Corridor until that point. And Jim has been working, he worked through the design and was the manager of design and engineering through Central Corridor up to the point where he took his new role. So I just want to kind of give you some context and background on whatever experiences have been. So with that, I think I'll turn it, I've got a few slides before I turn it over to Jim, actually. Today's topics, we've got just an overview. Again, we really will focus on that freight rail update and then kind of look ahead to what the next steps are for us. You've seen this slide last time, 17 stations. We've got 3 in St. Louis Park, 15 miles of double track for the light rail. And ridership is expected to be 30,000 on opening, or excuse me, in 2030. Again, these timelines we provided to you before, but you can see our intent and hope is that we can move into revenue operations in 2018. And also grounding in those 25 technical issues that I went over real briefly last time. The issue that we'll really focus on today is issue number 21. And again, most of those are broken up geographically, 1 through 20. And 21 is that one that you see, it kind of boxes around the 2 different options of co-location and relocation. So with that, I think I'll give most of the time to Jim here so we can keep moving on those technical pieces.
All right, thank you, Chris. Mr. Chair, board members. Well, I wanted to start out just giving you a little background of why we're looking at this freight rail question. As we entered into preliminary engineering, we received approval from the FTA, that's the Federal Transit Administration, to enter into PE, and we're looking for half of the project funding from the FTA, so we essentially follow their guidance as we move through this project. But they had indicated as part of the condition that we take a look at freight rail and identify a design for both co-location and relocation in order so a decision can be made in conjunction with the LRT. And I'll be talking about a lot of technical details here. I'll try to move effectively as I can, and as Chris indicated, if there are questions afterward, I'd be glad to take them. Even after the meeting, we'd be glad to field them as they come up over the coming weeks here. But this is really part of our due diligence to take a look at those. This is one of the 25 issues that we are examining for this project. So tonight I'm going to start by reviewing existing information and then get into some of the design options that we are taking a look at for both the co-locate and relocate for freight rail. So this slide is intended to depict the current conditions that we're working with. Use my pointer over here. The BNSF line is the line in blue going from the side of the page up to the upper right. And the up and down line, the line up and down going north-south is pink line. It's the CP MN&S spur. That's essentially that line that comes right by the high school today. In yellow is the Canadian Pacific CP Bass Lake spur, which TC&W, a company, Twin Cities and Western currently runs freight on that line. And at the city line between St. Louis Park and Minneapolis, it becomes HICRA, or Hennepin County Regional Railroad Authority owned track, and TC&W continues to operate on that track. And it links up at this Cedar Lake Junction up in where I'm pointing, where it links up to the BNSF Wayzata subdivision line. So just a little bit about freight traffic. These are numbers that we've collected from those three railroads, and these numbers have been a lot of discussion as we've been putting these forward, because we understand even a couple of years ago they may have been a little different, but these are intending to depict current conditions. So on the TC&W line, the Bass Lake Spur, TC&W has essentially 14 weekly trains on that line, that yellow line that I spoke of. And their train consists generally 65 to 75 cars, and those trains generally run in the morning, and then they come back in the late afternoon and early evening, 7 days a week. They do Twin Cities and Western also operates what is called a unit train, where they would operate something that's called on by another railroad. So they would run BNSF equipment, for example, over that Bass Lake Spur and the HICRA line, and on average they have 5 to 6 of those on a weekly basis up through that track. Today we understand from CP that they operate about 10 weekly trains on the MN&S line. Those essentially Monday through Friday in the morning and late afternoon, early evening. In fact, I just saw one tonight coming southward. The BNSF Wayzata subdivision, that's that northern line that BNSF runs about 91 trains on that line today. So just a little bit of an overview of the technical issue number 21. We are, as I said, we're looking at co-location and relocation. So co-location, what that means is essentially we would have freight, we'd have LRT and trail existing all together up through the Kenilworth corridor, up through on the eastern side here of this map, or the rightmost side. There's also a relocation concept we're looking at as well. And the draft environmental impact statement had a design for a relocation design, which essentially came off the Bass Lake Spur and went up onto the M&S line and then made its way onto the Wayzata subdivision. And so we will be taking a look at designs for both co-locate and relocate tonight. And as we started getting into this project, we started meeting with city staff from St. Louis Park and Minneapolis, as well as Three Rivers Park District and Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. But we've also been meeting with the three railroads as we've been developing these designs to make sure that we're meeting the technical criteria that the railroads have. So this is the Kenilworth corridor, and just a couple of points on the existing Kenilworth Trail. The maximum curve today, horizontal curve, is 6 degrees, and the maximum grade is about 1.06, with a maximum compensated grade, which accounts for both the horizontal movement and the vertical movements, is about 1.18. And those are important numbers because the railroads pay attention to those numbers anytime they're trying to determine a track design. So I'll be talking about those in a little bit here. As far as the DEIS relocation design, the maximum curvature was on the order of 8 degrees, so it was more than the 6 degree, and the maximum grade was 1.5, and the maximum grade, compensated grade is 1.82. So the railroads came back as part of the DEIS. They made comments on that design and said that it's really unacceptable for them to operate on that relocation design that was in the DEIS. And I would note that was a Hennepin County document that was just published last year, and since then we have taken on the technical aspects in PE. Met Council has, that is. So as we talk about the Kenilworth corridor, I want to talk about some right-of-way widths. These are important numbers that as we look at the design of this area here for the co-location, and I'll talk about 4 areas in A, B, C, and D areas where you can see the numbers there. Those depict the minimum pinch points, if you will, within those areas. And so just to concentrate on the maximum pinch points, this 49 feet just north of Westlake Bridge here is about the tightest point from along this Kenilworth corridor. You would note that there's just north of here in Area C, we have a available right-of-way of 42 feet. But if we assume that there's BNSF property, which I'll show you in a latter slide, that lies just north of the line here, if we use that, we'd have available right-of-way up to 98 feet. So that BNSF property is essentially unoccupied. And then north of 21st, we're about 98 feet of pinch point up in that location there, just north of 21st. So I'll first talk about the all modes at grade, and I will be talking about each of these designs. We essentially looked at 6 different configurations for how can we fit that freight, LRT, and trail within the Kenilworth corridor. So I'll review the all modes at grade first. So talking about the cross section, this is a typical cross section that we came up with in consultation with the freight railroad folks of 94 feet. And just a couple of points with these dimensions. There's 25 feet slated between the center line of the freight and the center line of the nearest LRT track, and another 25 feet from that freight over to the edge of right-of-way. Those numbers come from the American Railway Engineering and Maintenance and Way Association. They're essentially set criteria for freight companies to design track. And we've been in discussions with the Canadian Pacific and TC&W about actually what those numbers ought to be, because I'll show you some slides where today they don't have 25 feet here, and I'll talk about that when I get to the slides, because that's an important point here. But for our assumptions, as we've been working through this, we've been looking at a 94-foot section on this for this all modes at grade. So I'll go through again the sections A, B, C, and D here. You can see where the sections will be cut. So this section A is just north of our Westlake Station and just south of Westlake Street Bridge. And so we have a little bit different dimension here between the LRT tracks. It's a little on the order of 30 feet, and that's because we have just passed a station platform. So there's a center platform that accommodates that spacing between the 2 tracks. You'll note that we have 25 feet on the edge here, and I would start that these are existing. Through these slides, I'll show you the existing conditions. So we have 139 feet of available right-of-way between these points. You can see there's some condominiums that are located fairly close to that, right within that, just beyond that piece there. So if we superimpose the required spacing, if you will, for the freight, LRT, and the trail, we encroach on the condominiums by about 2 feet. And I should note that as we look at these cross sections, as we go up through Kenilworth, we're essentially holding the easternmost or the southernmost line constant. So the right-of-way line is held constant to the existing, and we're actually encroaching that 94 foot over to the west or to the north. We did take a look at holding the north line constant and encroaching to the south. And we also looked at dividing it between the two, essentially having that 94 foot placed kind of down the middle, so there would be impacts on both sides of that right-of-way. And we found that there were fewer impacts if we held that south or easternmost right-of-way constant with our 94 foot section. So this is a section just north of the Westlake Street Bridge, and this is where the pinch point really gets to be quite narrow. We're 49 feet of available right-of-way. You can see the existing townhomes just located 16 feet off of that right-of-way. So in this case, we have 28.5 feet beyond the between the center line of the freight and the edge of the building. I pointed out that that point of the edge of right-of-way to the center line of freight isn't always 25 feet. In this case, it's 12.5 feet. And we've asked TC&W and about this, and they've indicated that for a temporary condition, they're accepting this. But if it's going to be a permanent situation where there's freight, LRT, and trail, they are saying that we need 25 feet for that. For that particular dimension rather than the 12.5 they have today. So if we superimpose that 94-foot cross-section onto that 49-foot of right-of-way, you can see it encroaches into this first row of townhomes. And I do have some maps that will show that a little more clearly.
Do you mind if we ask questions as we go, or it maybe be better to wait?
Mr. Chair, I would, either way, I've been typically going through these and realize it's a lot of technical information, but it's up to the chair and the board members.
And just because this one relates to the temporary and permanent, and if this is a temporary condition, it's existed for a lot of years as a temporary condition, right?
Yeah, yes, Mr. Chair and board member, that is true. I don't know exactly how many years that was put in place, but it is understood by the parties that it's been a temporary condition. All right, so we'll move on to Section C. Section C is just north of Cedar Lake Parkway. And in this case, as I mentioned, we have BNSF property available up here. Right now, we have a right-of-way of 42 feet. And with the BNSF property, we have a total of 98 feet. And in this case, with our superimposing the 94-foot section, we have enough space to accommodate both the freight and the LRT and the trail through this area. As we proceed to the north or eastward further into Minneapolis, this is just north of 21st Street, and you see the available right-of-way is just a little over 183 feet. And here again, we do have room to put that. Put all three modes in there, and I would add, similar to the cross-section AA, this is just beyond the 21st Street platform station, so we have to have LRT spaced accordingly to accommodate that station platform. And I would also note there's a parcel impact just north of 21st that we'll see on the plans, not shown on here, but there's essentially a parcel that juts out within Hennepin County right-of-way, which is just about in this location. So the other co-locate designs we have looked at are shown here, trail relocated, elevated, LRT elevated, and two designs we looked at the LRT in a tunnel that I'll be talking about. And essentially beyond the hyphen there just shows you the approximate limits of where these designs would span along the alignment. So to start with the trail relocated, this green dashed line depicts where the trail would be relocated. Essentially, it just south of Cedar Lake Parkway, down here, Cedar Lake Parkway, the trail would be located out away from the Kenilworth corridor, and you can see how it would connect to the greenway from the west and from the east. And north of there, we believe we have enough room within that right-of-way, again, probably using that BNSF parcel, to have the trail alignment running to the north or west of the freight line up to 21st. Today, that trail does exist on the south or east side of the alignment.
You're talking the bike trail there? Are you talking about the bike trail?
Mr. Chair, yes, I am. Yes, so there's an existing bike trail that runs along the Kenilworth up through here. And so what this is intended to do is relocate the trail, because there's been questions out there, can you relocate the trail and maybe have enough room for the freight and the LRT trail somewhere else? So that's one of the conditions we analyzed. And so if we look at a cross section, and these cross sections I'm going to be talking about, or these next designs, are that point just north of the Lake Street Bridge in section BB, where that 49-foot of available right-of-way is located. And in this case, you'll see the existing off to the left, the 49 feet. And in this case, we have 74 feet required to accommodate the freight and the LRT, and you can see it does encroach onto the existing row of townhomes. And we're about 16 feet from the center line to the edge of the building there. So I just point out that there would still be an encroachment on that right-of-way with this condition is really the point here. As we look at the trail elevated, again, that existing cross-section on the 49 feet on the left here, here's where we have the trail above the freight and the LRT. In this case, we also believe we need 74 feet to accommodate this section. I would just note there's 9 feet between the edge of the pier for the bridge and the center line of freight, and that's the minimum we can go according to AREMA standards. And so we've really tried to fit that as tight as we could, but again, we still have right-of-way encroachment or building encroachment in this case. Looking at the LRT elevated, we do see that we don't need quite that 74 feet, but we still have a 65-foot requirement to accommodate LRT up in the air and next to freight here. As you can see, this would take it right next to the townhome, but for all practical purposes, we would presume that would probably have to be an acquisition, those first row of townhomes, and I'll show you that on the plan in a subsequent slide here. So we looked at two conditions for a tunnel. First, we looked at a shallow tunnel and a deep tunnel. And in this case, this is a shallow tunnel that would be just lying just below the freight. And in this case, we believe we need a cross-section of 68 feet to accommodate that. But I think more importantly, I would just point out to construct this, we essentially have to move the freight out of the way somehow. And we really don't have any other place to put the freight during construction in this case. And so we would have to still take property, we'd still have to take property, as a matter of fact, just to build this configuration.
It'd be a temporary take, though, wouldn't it?
Even Mr. Chair, board member, it could be a temporary take, but it would still require some buildings being removed, because essentially it's a narrow corridor through that piece, essentially between Cedar Lake Parkway down to the Lake Street Bridge. So this
I got one question. Could you have you looked at putting the underneath trail for the light rail to the right of the existing freight rail? Instead of moving the freight rail and disrupting that, just leave it there and then put it off to the right underneath the bike trail?
Oh, as far as, maybe I make sure I understand. So as far as the tunnel, putting the tunnel under the bike, is that what you're saying? Yep. Yeah, we would still need the spacing. Really, what the spacing is between the trail and the freight and the right-of-way. So it doesn't really matter from a right-of-way perspective where this tunnel goes. But I would say that from a structural loading perspective, you would want this tunnel located somewhat centered under the freight. Because if we had it a little bit over here, if we had the freight partially on the tunnel and partially on soil, that might cause for an uneven, a chance for some settlement going one way, a differential settlement condition. All right, so the deep tunnel, we also examined that, and this design, we would have to essentially start the tunnel west of our Westlake station in order to build a pit. In this case, we believe that, well, we essentially located the pits because we have to get a tunnel boring machine in to bore these two tunnels. And we locate the pits in such a location so we could have a bypass for the freight during construction. So we essentially located the first pit, or the westernmost pit, west of Westlake Station to accommodate that, where we wouldn't have a right-of-way impact in that location. But I note that and still in this case, we need 68 feet of cross-section, again, to accommodate that 25 feet of center line to edge of right-of-way. So even with a deep tunnel, we still don't get around the constraints of that right-of-way issue. We would also mention that we would impact the Westlake Street Bridge. The piles go down about 75 to 85 below the ground surface, and so we would essentially have to take that bridge out and replace it. And our design attempts to preserve 21st Street Station, so it's at grade, and I would add that the Westlake Street station would be submerged. It would be below grade, well below grade, because it would essentially be where that pit is located. But we were looking to try to preserve 21st Street so it could be at the ground surface. In order to do that, the pit is just south of 21st, and that also requires removal of the Burnham Bridge. That currently is supported by drill shafts that extend about 12 feet down below the ground surface. So here's some maps that would indicate the limits of those 6 designs that I talked about. And maybe in the interest of time, unless there's an interest from the board and chair, I could go in more detail. But essentially, what these maps are depicting in the red would show where properties would have to be required, or acquired, I should say. And essentially, we'd have to remove those. The areas in yellow are essentially partial acquisitions we've identified. That means we would need a portion of their property, but not necessarily all of it. So it doesn't necessarily mean a building would have to be removed. But this is essentially for the all modes at grade mode, if you will. And just to get you oriented, the Westlake Street Bridge is located here, and Westlake is just located right here.
Jim, I think in the interest of time, why don't we move along and get into our issues? The reason for pointing this out was simply because that where there are issues further down the line, and they're working through 6 different alternatives on a Kenilworth part, whatever issues exist further down the line, if something isn't resolved there, it gets pushed back our way, and that's the reason we want to discuss tonight is issue number 21.
Right. Okay. Very well. I'll move on to slide 33 then, and talk about the relocate designs we've looked at. So I wanted to start with the modified MN&S connection. As we've been working with the railroad since earlier this year, we again looked at the DIS design and determined that based on comments from the railroads that we needed to come up with something a little bit better in terms of flatter grades and both horizontally and vertically. So we attempted with this modified MN&S, which roughly follows the DEIS relocation design, but we tried to flatten some of these curves. However, the railroads came back, both CP and TC&W, and indicated that this reverse curve situation is really untenable for them. That, coupled with the rise in grade, we're essentially rising about 23 feet or so to get up to the MN&S grade. So I'll give you, for an example, the current bridge that goes over the Bass Lake Spur right here is about 23 feet above the tracks on the Bass Lake Spur, which runs along through here. And so we were looking to try to come up with a modified design, and the freight said, well, you know, this still doesn't really make it for us from a technical perspective. We can't pull our long trains through this reverse curve. So what they had suggested is why don't you look at a long curve? I'll try not to point you in the head there. So a long curve coming up through here, just a continuous curve. So we did look at that, and that's called Brunswick East. However, that design was also discarded because we created another reverse curve for the MN&S connection southward. And I would note that as we're looking at these designs, it would presume that the existing MN&S line would be removed essentially in front of the high school. Essentially, we're looking for these designs I'm going to be talking about are looking at essentially from 33rd on down to this connection down south of the Bass Lake Spur, which be replaced track. So we'd essentially have the track under these designs I'm going to be talking about that would be removed. So this is the Brunswick West alignment. You can see in green where we, after the Brunswick East was developed, we tried to refine things a little bit by, again, flattening out the curves. And so this has a more gentle curve, both from a horizontal perspective and a vertical perspective. And at first we looked at an at-grade condition where we're essentially running at street level as much as we could. We're essentially trying to rise up from the Bass Lake Spur, make our way up to the Minnetonka Bridge, and then drop down in elevation toward that Wayzata subdivision. The other design that we've developed is the Brunswick Central. This is essentially kind of trying to thread the needle, if you will, between the west design and the east design. Again, we initially looked at an at-grade situation for a Brunswick Central, and you see the curves were much flatter here. And so one of the comments the railroads had said is that they think we're on track with the horizontal curves that we're showing both in the green and the blue, but the vertical rise and fall was still a problem for them. So we looked at both conditions and said, well, let's see if we can elevate things. And so that's where we currently are, is looking at a Brunswick West elevated and a Brunswick Central elevated. And I have a lot of cross sections to share with you to show you what that might look like.
Jim, can you just explain on the Brunswick Central here, does this design propose that all three of those lines are in place, the green and the blue and the? And that's what's not clear to me.
Yes, it would just be a single line. So maybe if I could run through a central configuration only, if you could follow me with the arrow. Essentially, the line would come, follow this blue, and link back up to the MN&S corridor up through here. There would also be a connection for the M&S to come down through here. Again, this blue line coming down through here. And finally, there would be a southerly connection, this line coming down through here. So the line in green would not occur. The modified, this reverse curve would not occur, nor would this other southerly connection occur. So I'm going to walk you through the Brunswick West alignment here. These are a little larger drawings to show you what is being proposed under this design concept. Under this arrangement, we have Louisiana Station located south of that Bass Lake corridor. The locally preferred alignment, which is part of the DEIS, had that station up just on the berm here, if you will, next to the freight tracks. And because of this southerly connection, we don't have enough clearance to accommodate that station or the track in that area. So we're essentially intending to have that station south of there. And I would mention under the co-locate or the relocate, the southerly connection I spoke of would occur. And under all our design assumptions, we are looking at LRT being on the south of the corridor and freight being north of the corridor, north of the LRT tracks. That is different from the locally preferred alignment, which had the freight where it exists today on the south of the corridor and LRT just north. So we would make that transition in Hopkins just as we cross Excelsior. So in this case for the Brunswick West, we would start on structure going across the Golden Auto site. And I'm changing directions on you, so north is pointing toward me here, and that alignment is coming down through here, so the Golden Auto site is down through here, and the Bass Lake Spur is running through here. So that southerly connection I spoke of comes down through here. Again, we're showing the properties in red that would be fully impacted. That would mean they'd have to, the buildings would have to be removed, and the areas in yellow are indicating there's partial impact, so it doesn't necessarily mean a building has to be removed, but we need a sliver or a portion of the property to achieve this design. And we'll have cross sections as we move through, so we'll have cross section A, which is just before the football field, and we'll have cross section B, which is in the football field there. Under this scenario, we would link up Walker Street along Trunk Highway 7 to carry up through here, so there'd be a linkage between these 2 points to take us take traffic underneath the freight. Again, we would have a freight track connector here. This is the connector up to the M&S northward, and here's the southerly connector that would occur.
In that one, you've got our football field circled in yellow, which I understand you to say is partially impacted, but the track's going right through the middle of it. So why isn't it in red?
Yes, Mr. Chair, board member, it's in yellow because we don't believe we need the whole parcel, but I will talk about that because we would essentially need to move the football field. So it wouldn't necessarily, at the end of the, if this design were to be...
This is red to us, but
okay,
yeah.
Yes. Well, it's just from a technical perspective, we don't necessarily need the whole property, so there might be some remnants left over. But I'll certainly talk to what would have to be removed, because I understand your differentiation there. So this is a bit north of that last section, give you a better view of how this design would proceed through the football field. Again, I have cross sections to show what that would look like. And we'd propose that there's a reconfiguration of the roadway through here, Lake Street and Wooddale into Dakota here. Again, these roadways would be underneath the freight tracks. Essentially, these would be at-grade roads with the grade separation for their freight. As we proceed to the north, we pass through some city parcels, and about line D, cross-section D, we essentially have a common alignment between the west and the east, and I'll talk about those as we get into central, but they roughly follow the MN&S line today. And again, that MN&S line follows where the black parcels are. This is Canadian Pacific parcels. That track would be removed under this design if it were pursued. So that section AA, just before we get to the football field, just south of Library, you can see that this is being proposed as an embankment here, and we would have an increase of 14 feet in terms of where that track would be today. There are two tracks here because we have the MN&S connection going southward, and then this off to the left is the connector coming from the Bass Lake Spur connecting up to the north piece of the MN&S. And you can see some buildings dashed in the background that they would have to be acquired as part of this design. This is that section we just spoke of within the football field, and we're proposing a 66-foot right-of-way under this situation. The grade of the top of rail will essentially be 18 feet or so above the existing football field. And under this scenario, essentially, we would look to relocate this football field. And I would say that we are taking a look at scenarios about how that might work. We understand, maybe the school board isn't necessarily on board with all these designs, but we're trying to understand, working with the city, what could happen with that field if this were to occur. So under this suggestion, this design suggests Lake Street would be relocated through here. Moving further to the north, this is just north of the football field. You'll see that the existing McDonald's, that would have to be another acquisition. We go through that property, so that building would have to be removed for this. We are now about 21 feet above the existing grade in this condition. Again, trying to keep that 66 foot of right-of-way. And that 66 feet really stems from what happens northward. There's at the narrowest point north of this location up through the neighborhood, the right-of-way gets to be about 66 feet. So this is just walk you through the Brunswick Central alignment. Again, Louisiana Station is located similarly to how we showed in the Brunswick Central, or Brunswick West, excuse me. Under this case, again, the north is oriented a little bit differently here, going off to the right of the screen here. And under this situation, the Brunswick Central line would come up off the Bass Lake Spur again, and then cross Trunk Highway 7. In this case, we believe we'd have to lower Trunk Highway 7 by about 4.5 feet. There's a frontage road just south of that would have to be lowered about 4.5 to 5 feet. And in this case, we would also link in Walker Street as well, so there would be a connection from the east to the west in that area. Again, we'd have the southerly connector from the Bass Lake Spur going southward to the MN&S, and then the MN&S connector would come across Lake Street and connect to the existing MN&S alignment there. And I have some cross sections. You can see A, B, and C and D, and further up north. Now, we're avoiding the football field, but now we are getting close to the Spanish Immersion School, and we're getting within playground area. So this is just the map that as we move further to the north, you can see as we head down, I'll be talking about these cross sections. In this case, Wooddale would have to require some regrading. We believe that need to be taken down about 1.5 feet to accommodate adequate clearance underneath the freight. Again, this would be a grade separated condition. Lake Street would extend up through here as it does today. And we would carry on that alignment, again, getting up to the section D and E, which is consistent with the Brunswick West and gets fairly close to where the MN&S is today. And again, under this scenario, the existing MN&S line would be removed. Now, we haven't necessarily been in full discussions with CP about what would happen with this remnant parcels. The remnant parcels that CP would have, but we're pretty, we're assured that the freight tracks would be removed. There's also transmission lines up through here owned by Excel that we would have to have some discussions with them in terms of what happens with those lines, because I think that would be a concern as well. So just starting as we did on the Brunswick West, this is that first section AA, where we're just kind of south of the football field area. And here in this case, we would have the two tracks again, the M&S connector and the Bass Lake connector to the northbound M&S, and we would have to have a grade increase of about 11 feet to the top of rail in this condition. Section BB, this is a section that goes close by the Spanish immersion. We did figure that there's a minimum of 129 feet from the closest edge of building to the center line of freight in this condition. You'll see that there's a house that would have to be acquired just beyond here. Again, we're carrying the 66 feet. And we do understand, based on some discussions that we've had, that there's a keen interest, if this design were to be pursued, that there's a keen interest in having some understanding what kind of connection might be needed to get to the football field, because we understand the children at the Spanish immersion school do access that facility. And so coupled with the impact to the impact to the park area and the play fields, there's also that impact to the access. We'll proceed further to the north. This is section C. In this case, we are 19 feet above the existing grade, and we have buildings in the background that would be impacted. I think these are just office buildings up through here. Section D, we are north of Lake Street. In this case, we are on structure to link up into the MN&S. And what this alignment, both west and central, do is we essentially rise up from the Bass Lake Spur and reach a high point about Wooddale, and then we start dropping down in elevation to get into the BNSF Wayzata subdivision. In this case, we would be 19 feet above the existing grade in this case. Section EE, further to the north, this is near where we start paralleling Brunswick Avenue, and the grade would have to be increased by about 13 feet for an overall 22 feet below the nearest adjacent grade to that top of rail. And you can see where the existing track lies today. So in this case, if this were to be built, this track would be removed again and an embankment would be built up to accommodate this. So just for a little bit of clarity, perhaps to just give folks an understanding of property impacts that might be common to both, this image is intended to do just that, to again show the Brunswick West in green and the central in blue, and these areas that are hatched are essentially properties that either full or partial would be impacted by both of the alignments. As I spoke of, as we get to 33rd or thereabouts, as we head northward, both the west and the central have similar designs, and so I'll talk about some cross sections through there. Again, here we show areas in red where there would be a full acquisition, and I don't think we have any yellow up in this section here, but essentially we have 6 residences that would be impacted through this area. Under this design, it's proposed that similar to what the DEIS had, is to leave, actually close 29th and leave 28th open here. And that's one of the reasons why these 4 parcels are impacted, because of needing to leave that 28th Street open. This is just the final plan of this segment here. This takes us up through the Iron Triangle, as it's called, the BNSF running from the top left to the lower right. And what this design would do, essentially, for both west and central Brunswick options, we would run along an existing embankment. We'd have to build up that embankment, as I'll show in section I here, but we essentially run along a siding, if you will, for about 10,000 feet as we head towards Minneapolis and into Minneapolis before the trains can actually link into the BNSF line. So this is a cross-section, FF. This is just south of Minnetonka. You can see here it's about 20 feet overall to the top of rail. In this case, you can see the existing tracks here, and we are rising about 6 feet in grade. We're also doing a slight adjustment to accommodate. We're essentially trying to connect with the Minnetonka bridge that CP had installed a few years ago. That's a little askew from the current alignment, both north and south there. Section GG, this is essentially 14 feet overall, and we have an increase of about 5 feet from that existing track to the top of rail in this case. Again, you can see some of the areas where it gets on the tighter end, where it gets down to about 66 feet there. Section HH, this is just this is north of 28th Street, where we have a whoops, excuse me, getting a little too far ahead of myself, where we have an overall grade of 15 feet above, essentially the top of rail is 15 feet above adjacent. In this case, we are raising the grade about 4 feet. Section II, this is that area I talked about, the iron triangle, and essentially you can see the existing embankment through here. There are no tracks there today. There were at some point several years ago, and what this is proposing to do is build up that embankment for an overall 23 feet above the adjacent grade to achieve that top of rail. And it would essentially make its way down to the BNSF Wayzata subdivision. There is a trail that runs along the south side of the BNSF, and under our design proposal for both east and west, there would be a pedestrian bridge that would take folks over the freight that would be constructed here. And that's shown on the plan work that I in a previous slide. So just a review of what we've done to date here in terms of this issue. We've actually started back in February working with the freight railroad companies to really understand the issues, and we've been working with the cities as well to understand the issues out there and develop designs what might be possible. I would say that the city of St. Louis Park or Minneapolis, they don't necessarily endorse these designs. We've been really working with the freight companies to understand the technical challenges and trying to work around those, realizing there's challenges for both co-location and relocate. But as was spoken, Chris was before you on May 28th. Mark Furman, our program director, and myself, we were before the city council at a work session on that same night. And then Chris and I were before the Minneapolis Transportation and Public Works Committee on June 4th. And then we have a business advisory committee and a community advisory committee, which Rolf is part of. And we had a joint meeting last Thursday where we gave the same presentation. In terms of next steps, we are going to give this similar presentation to our corridor management committee. As part of our light rail projects, we are mandated to have a corridor management committee made up of elected officials from cities and counties, and the county in this case, and we will report this issue to them that I'm presenting to you tonight. We also will have a public open house on June 13th. That's a morning session and an afternoon session, or I say early evening. And we are actually looking at having some community meetings. We haven't calendared those yet, but they'll be in the July timeframe, where we're looking to have community meetings to really have more of a presentation, to have the public have an opportunity to ask questions. And as we get into later on in June and July, we're actually already in the process. We're starting to develop cost estimates for all of these alignments we're looking at. So those 6 co-locate and the 2 relocation designs, the Brunswick West and the Brunswick Central. And we're looking to make a recommendation to the various bodies that we report to, starting with the Business Advisory Committee in July 24th, and culminating with a recommendation to our council in the August timeframe. And during this time, we will continue to refine the design and work with our environmental consultant, CH2M Hill, is helping us with the environmental process to identify those impacts and understand how we can mitigate or avoid those impacts. And then finally, we have just a look ahead at the overall project. I mentioned the freight rail open houses. We do have station open houses as well. We will be at the Bethel Synagogue on Thursday, June 20th, 4:30 to 7, to talk about stations within St. Louis Park, not necessarily about the freight rail. That'll be on the 13th. And then later on in this year, we are looking to get seeking approval on the LRT components of this project from the cities, and we look to get that approval toward the end of the year. In order to do that, we look to have our plans done in the late third quarter. And so to get to that point, we need to get the freight rail decided, because we have to understand, is it going to be co-locate or relocate in terms of what we carry in those plans. And I should note that we are carrying designs for Louisiana Station, Wooddale, and Beltline for a co-locate and a relocate design. So we're equipped if we go co-locate or relocate. So we have those designs that have been developed over the last several months.
Thank you for the detail in this presentation. And I just last night got back from a week in Stuttgart, Germany, where I had great fun riding their light rail and all sorts of rail all over the city. An amazing system. Getting there and developing it is a challenge. And my question has to do with these proposed Brunswick West and Central. You're showing significantly raised tracks, either by embankment or structure, and in many cases taller than the mostly one-story buildings and homes in that area. Do you have examples? Well, my questions have to do with sight lines, noise, and safety of having freight trains that are above the homes in the area, and our buildings are the tallest in the area, and that's 2 stories. So, you know, moving along at the 2nd story level of some of our buildings. Do you have examples in the area of where we could see something that looks like that? And do you take into account sight lines, noise, and I assume safety issues that are related to a raised bed? I just imagine a train going off track is even more of an issue when it's tumbling down an embankment.
Right, Mr. Chair, board member, yes, I'll answer the kind of in order there. In terms of examples, we are assembling those because that question has come up, and we do understand that there's a number of conditions down in the Chicago area that have this, so we'll be collecting, and we'd certainly be happy to share those with you. I don't have them yet, but we're in the process of doing that. I would just say that you know, this design, I understand it's something that's up in the air, and it's quite different from what is there today. In terms of how we design this, it'll be, I would note that we would use continuous welded rail, which would limit the noise in terms of what the, you know, for maybe through a wheel squeal, if you will. We've also flattened the curves significantly from what is out there today. And we've also eliminated any at-grade crossings until you get up to 28th. And if that, you know, ultimately if the city may decide, well, maybe we don't need to keep 28th open, that's some question that still has to be, you know, explored, I would say. We essentially, if that were closed, we wouldn't have any at-grade crossings, so you wouldn't have that horn blowing to contend with. Will also be using what they refer to as a 136-pound rail, which is kind of the highest, kind of the class 1 type rail that can be used for freight. And that coupled with it being constructed, it'll be constructed such that that you won't be in groundwater, which causes a lot of issues for trains having problems wobbling back and forth. It'll be up in a dry environment, if you will. So that does help minimize that potential for a derailment. Those designs all coupled together.
Jim, I want to, in the interest of time, I want to cut this off, but I want to thank you and your team for coming tonight. I want to make sure that we get a chance to digest this information. We will be talking to you in the future.
Yes.
As we have discussed, we will put together, we've been working with Ralph, we've been working with the city, because I just want to make sure that we have time to digest the information, and we're going to invite you back so that we get to hear it 3 times as a principal of education, and we want to bring you back to hear it. We'll continue to work with Ralph, we'll continue to work with the city, and we'll continue to work these issues because we have a lot of questions. And as we formulate our response to this, to the proposals that we have here, we'll put those together, and we'll continue to work with the city and work with you so that we get some of the questions answered. Okay, hang on just a second.
I'm disagreeing with the chair because I just sort of want to keep you here because I think this is important. But if you're coming back, I will live with that. But when you come back, amongst all the other concerns we're hearing about, there certainly are issues about mitigation because it sounds like your proposals are going to have a huge impact on our school district. But the other area I want to hear about is, it sounds to me like the construction phase will be it's going to cut our city in half, and we've got to get kids from one place to the other into schools. And I don't know if you're giving any thought to, if this goes ahead in whatever capacity, how disruptive that will be and how we're going to manage, and you're going to help us manage that as you're working through your costs and mitigation. And that's one area I haven't heard even begun to be talked about.
Yes, Mr. Chair, board member, that is something we are taking a look at, and we are actually having conversations with the freight folks to understand how we can get this constructed, because we need to understand that too. Part of our process is not just design, but we need to understand how it's constructed, and that's part of the piece.
Again, Jim, thank you very much. Chris, thank you. Sophia, thank you all for being here. Ralph, we appreciate your continued involvement in this. We'll be formulating our responses, and we will work together to make sure that we have a response. Again, these are huge impacts to our schools, and we want to make sure we understand how the mitigation will happen. And as we have discussed, number one issue to us is the safety of our children, and we will continue to work that as we work with you. But there are many other issues, including noise, vibration, operations, as Nancy discussed, how we work our way through the construction of this thing. There's a lot going on here, and again, we appreciate your time. And it's noted, you have a website that notes the times. There will be public meetings on this going on, but the decisions are being made very rapidly here. And so we want to make sure that we are totally informed, and we'll continue to work with you and work with the city and work with Ralph to make sure we understand what the impacts are on the school district.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. We'll continue to work with Ms. Salen to answer any questions you need or come before you as needed.
Thank you.
You know, I got one before you leave. I'm sorry. I'm just curious on the vetting here. You had under the DEIS, you had the main thing that was out there for probably a year, the main plan, and the railroads knew about it. And I'm just curious. Now we've just found out about this plan last week. How much vetting has gone into the development of all these things that have gone on? I mean, is this enough time to really realistically analyze this and get it done and make a decision by August on which you're going to either co-locate or relocate, and which of the two? Is that realistic?
Well, Mr. Chair, board member, we realize it's a very tight timeline, but we do believe it's realistic. We, in order to keep onto our schedule, we would like to try to keep this moving so we can get to that municipal consent by the end of the year.
Jim, thank you. Thank you all. Next item on our agenda is the technology levy discussion. Tom Marble, Nate Tangen, and Angela Franson. Before you leave, we just had a quick discussion up here. I think we're going to ask you to come back in 2 weeks, just so, and this time to make sure that it's a question and answer period, because that way everybody will have a chance to study this, and we'll have a chance to focus our questions very clearly. So we'd ask you to come back in 2 weeks if you would. Thank you.
Exactly.
Sorry, guys.
No. We got to switch gears here a little bit, right? A little bit different topic, however, not necessarily less complex. So we're here to talk today about strategy 2 of our strategic plan, which is up here on our slide. That our result we're looking for is that teachers are using 21st century technology in their classroom to enhance, engage students and accelerate their achievement in many of the different core subject areas and specialist areas as well. We started this journey back in 2008. First couple of years of this, we're really focused on very particular types of technologies that we were implementing in classrooms, things like smart boards, CPS clicker systems in the classrooms, Moby slates, those sorts of things. It's interesting to point out when we started this, the iPad didn't exist. And that's how rapidly this changes on us. So in the past year, the two people who are going to speak here, who I think we've introduced to before, are our technology trainers and are a key component of the success of our teachers. So I presented to our strategic plan core team a few weeks ago. Some of you who might not have been able to or weren't there for my presentation, I'm going to rehash a couple of things that I said there. But we want to focus on some of the things that we're focusing on with Nate and Angela as our technology trainers, because the success of the engagement and the achievement of the students starts with the teachers knowing how to use these tools, recognizing their power, and integrating those into their classrooms. So we're going to talk a little bit about the strategies that we're working on there. And then I'm going to end up just reminding everyone about the importance of our technology levy that really drives all of the things that we're going to be talking about here. So how are we getting there? Nate and Angela are our two instructional technology trainers, and they're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that they've been working on. So Angela Franson and Nate Tangen. I'm going to put that up too embarrassing.
Thank you.
All right, good evening. Angela and I have been really partnering together. The way it had been looked at as she was middle school and high school, and I've been elementary, and we're just trying to team up to kind of rebrand in this last portion of the year. And one way that we've been doing that is by meeting with principals at all sites. We had the opportunity to sit and inform the cabinet what our plan is. And one of the ways that we're starting to tighten up kind of what we're trying to do is to follow the SAMR model. And what we want to do is, originally when we first bought technology, our tools as technology coaches was to help them use the tool. We are there. And the first stage of it is substitution. So teachers are using an interactive whiteboard, very similar to the way they would have used a chalkboard or a whiteboard, but there's a few added features that have helped with student engagement. So now our goal is to move forward into augmentation, modification, and redefinition. And our hope is just to see kind of those transformations. And it's existing in our district currently. I would say a good portion are at substitution, some are at augmentation, but now it's the big push. And that's what, when we were going around meeting with principals, we wanted to make sure we had a shared message, a vision of what they want to see in their buildings, and also to be equitable across the district. We have staff that transfers between building and building. We want to make sure that it's not a have to at this site and not a have to at that site. We want to make sure the development is consistent across the district. This is one of our fancy models that Angela had found. She's really big into infographics. You want to speak to that a little bit, Angela?
That's right. This is a really cool infographic that starts kind of in the center with sharing just some of the basic tools, the important attributes and capabilities that happen, like kind of the verbiage that goes with all these different big words.
Could we make sure you talk into the mic so
yes,
that
sorry.
they can hear you at home?
There, thank you. But this kind of goes with, because it shows some of the vocabulary you might hear happening in classrooms, some of the activities you might see going on in those different levels of the SAMR model. And then it even has interactive icons on the outside that you can actually click on the web page that take you right there. So this is a great tool that we would give our teachers to kind of get them a place to start with. And like Nate said, at this point, we're just expecting that they're kind of at that bottom level, and there are a good percentage of teachers that are moving their way upwards, and we're just seeing a real power in numbers between the two of us with the resources we have here, and then working also with districts across the city with gathering all these different strategies that people are using to get their students engaged and get that achievement gap closed up, and start looking at some of the tools we have to get there. Along with working with admins, we found that not only is there a need to make sure that the people in our buildings that are leading teachers, like the principals and the cabinet in each building, are getting trained, and then with the addition of them being trained, we're hoping that all of you might get trained as well, and start looking at how we can use these tools like Chromebooks and Google Apps and the tools we have like Moodle to get us all to that next step. We're going to make sure then that teachers also, in fall after those initial training days are over, have a basic level of understanding that we're all speaking the same language, that we all understand the basic tools, and then we can really bounce from there up to that next level of learning and engagement with the SAMR model. So one of the ways that we're doing this is with our flipped classroom cohort that we've started for this next year. We put out the call to all teachers K-12. We had about 25 teachers that agreed to be a part of this cohort for next year. And if you've heard at all about the flipped movement going on right now, it's a really hot idea that we're going to be bringing our instruction outside of the classroom walls. So it's really kind of moving towards kids getting the material that they want when they want it. So it's even getting to the point where kids can kind of choose their own pace, choose their own ability to move at where they need and get the support that they need. So with this cohort, we're going to be reading a book together, we're going to be meeting together, we're going to be also providing some flipped professional development where we're allowing teachers to come to a website and kind of get themselves up to speed on tools at their time when they need it. Same kind of idea that we're kind of taking it away from one person standing up front to a time when teachers can go where they need to get to at their own time. So we're really excited about this cohort and getting moving with that as well.
I want to mention one more thing. In our meetings with the principals, we had discussed with them the possibility of flipping one of their professional development meetings as well. The video that we had shared was there was a principal from another district that was just even started off with, the custodian has asked that you no longer hang something from the ceilings. Addressed, done with. I stopped the video and said, now picture you're at a staff meeting and you share this. This becomes a 10 to 12 minute conversation about why can't we hang things from the ceiling. So when we talk about flipping, we're talking about personalizing in the learning environment. It can be for staff, anybody, to make sure that they're learning at their pace. So rather than come to a meeting to get information, you already have the information, so you can move forward. You can have that rich discussion. Because right now, obviously, we know that our days are tight. We want to make sure that we're addressing the achievement gap, student learning. We want to make sure that that's all addressed, and we're hoping that trying to provide this environment of personalized learning can bring our staff, teachers, students, all of us on board, community members.
Right.
When do they do the flipped classroom though? When do the teachers do it? I mean, as I understand it, they do the lesson at night, so they got to have time to tape it or do whatever they need to do. So then they're free for the period when they have the kids. So
Time, right? It's all about
time, extra burden on the teachers. How do you account for that?
Districts that have been implementing flipping have really started off with a really basic level of use. So they might take just one lesson for an entire unit and just flip one lesson. In other districts, we know that as they've entered even into their second and third year of flipping, that they're maybe going to require 1 unit or 3 units. So it's a very slow and gradual process so that teachers have that time to start turning those lectures into screencasts, things that can be then worked on over the summertime, and then hopefully also just during their prep time. And you see a lot of collaboration happening with flipping, where you have departments working together, not just in charge of your own material, but you might help your colleagues, that you come together and share some of that work. So definitely takes time, but once they get rolling and zipping, it really does make an impact and get moving quite quickly.
We do have a teacher at the middle school who has flipped her classroom this year, and what we're hoping is that that through the data that she's gathered, this is in the math area at the middle school, that she had some baseline data from last year. She's flipped her classroom this year, and once she's put all her grades in and looked at maybe next fall, we have some baseline versus flipped data that we can look at and say, you know, what impact did this have on your students? As Angela mentioned, the real reason that this teacher went this direction was because she could lay out for the students and say, if you want to get an A in my class, these are the things you have to do. If you want to get a B in my class, these are the things that you have to do. And if you want to get an F in my class, these are the things that you won't do. And it allows the students to basically see what the work is up front. The material is out there. They can work at their own pace. And the students who get it can move ahead. The students who are struggling can review with this information online. I don't know, you've talked a lot more with her about this, but.
And I even hate to put words in her mouth either, because she's been just passionate about this and has taken such a standpoint. Yes, go ahead.
It was more of how many, I think you said there's 25 that are going to do it next year.
Yes.
Are they throughout the whole
They really are.
grades?
Surprisingly, we had quite a number of elementary teachers sign up. I think we have 8 elementary teachers signed up, about 4 or 5 from the middle school, and then a good 10, 12 from the high school. So a good majority are at the high school, but at the same time, we've seen examples of this all the way down to 3rd grade, 2nd grade. Looks different. But what we're really hoping to do is just have a wide open conversation. There can be a lot of misconceptions about what flipping is. The very basic model is that you're instructing at night, doing homework in class. But beyond that, it can become really a self-pacing mastery concept where kids that are able to move quickly can get to more enriched content. The kids that need more support get more support because they both have the support of their colleagues in class that are at their level and even at their pace, and they get more teacher contact because that teacher has time to work with them. Allowing kids also to go home and see those videos over and over again just helps them review, and those are the tools that we're talking about putting in their hands and in the hands of classrooms where they just have increased access. So.
Joe, and then Nancy.
And are you finding that it's basically lectures that are being done, or do you also find kind of technology within technology where you're using a graphing application or something
And
like
that's
that?
really where you're moving up that model. So at the very basic level, again, you would just be doing a lecture or your instruction that you'd be going, if you did a PowerPoint in class, you'd instead do a screencast where you're speaking over that PowerPoint. That's that very basic substitution level. But when you get to the higher levels, you may have them do a little exploratory work where you're asking them some questions. They'll respond to you via a document like Google Docs. You can do a form. Then they might watch a video or a TED Talk, or there's all kinds of YouTube videos out there that teachers are using for content. And then you'll have them at the end of that, create some kind of a project. So it's more than just a one lesson. Then you're talking about a whole concept that might take a week to complete. So that's where you're really going beyond just what could happen even in a normal classroom, but you're allowing kids to really start to take that learning into their own hands, which is where we want them to go, to really develop that love of learning outside of the classroom walls. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think revising how we teach and how we use technology in the 21st century is critically important. I was with the 2.5-year-old, and she knew how to look at my iPhone and flip the picture to the next one. 2.5. I thought, okay, look out when she's 5 and starting school. But I have a huge concern about equity and access, and some of what I hear about the flipped classroom seems to me to assume that students have internet access, devices at home, technology, and I know lots of kids who don't. And I don't want us to be systemizing something that increases the gap and is unfair to all of our students. And that is just a factor I want us to have in mind, and I want you to be thinking about. And we aren't yet able to give everybody internet access and a technology at home. So how do we manage that?
Exactly, and we do have the advantage of not having jumped in feet first like a lot of districts have around us, where they've just put the devices out there and not really knowing how everything would turn out. And we've seen a lot of interesting stories coming about from districts that have done that. So we do have the luxury of sitting back a little bit. The whole idea of this is to start looking at what we do have in place, what we can do to flip, and what that looks like. And maybe that means that you would have a lesson that would be due over a couple of weeks, so that you would give kids a lot of opportunities to either check out materials from the media center, to be in the media center after school, before school, during class time. There's certainly going to be a lot of questioning learning and a lot of trial and error with how this all pulls together. But you absolutely have good concern.
One of the examples that I'll speak to on that is, as Angela and I have met with the Senior High School's Technology Committee over the year, we've looked at different strategies and always looking at how can we gather data around the use of this to show achievement. We get a lot of information about engagement, and engagement is very subjective from the teacher. Engagement doesn't always equate into achievement. So we worked with Rob Metz and his technology committee, and they identified a group of a class in the high school that had the highest failure rate, and they have baseline data on this. So we said, as the senior high committee, what we're going to do is we're going to look at how we can do things differently in that class next year. So we're going to be looking to put classroom sets of possibly something like Chromebooks in these classes and allow the teachers to teach a little bit differently. And if the students need access outside of the classroom, then they could possibly check that out from their teacher on an overnight basis or something along that line. So we're going to be trying some of those things next year, but we have some baseline data to work from. And as we do some of the changes, we can track and see if it's having a positive impact or, you know, in certain areas, or if it's having that impact that we're expecting it to have. So.
Is that class, I'm just curious,
Yeah.
Is that class a lower level class, or is it like the juniors?
It's a lower level class.
Okay. So you can track it over a couple of years and
Yes.
see what the progress. Good.
So talking about equity and all that kind of leads me into the next thing that I just wanted to give you an update on, because we talked about it through the spring. So our Bring Your Own Technology pilot this spring at the high school, we opened it up, and we were just really interested to see who was bringing what to school and who is registered when they registered their device on our network. So I just have a couple of quick slides to show you what showed up on our network here. This is a graph from our system that shows the different devices that were brought to school. And you'll see here that almost 88% of the devices are ultra mobile devices, tablets and smartphones. Very little up there you saw was a laptop in nature. So it's kind of what we expected the students were bringing through the door. Our next slide here is a table, a breakdown of grades 9 through 12, male, female, and ethnicity across. And the thing I kind of looked at here I thought was interesting is if you start at the bottom with the 12th grade totals on the far right side, and you go back up, the younger the students are, the more of them are registering their devices. So the highest number of registrations we had were in the 9th grade.
Yeah, I figure some of the seniors probably thought, why bother for 2 months? But it holds true through all the grades, so it's
But
very
about the 1,300 some students in the short period of time we've done this pilot, we've had over 600 devices registered. So we expect that when we see people coming through the door next fall, that we're going to see that number grow even more. However, as Nancy pointed out, we can't assume that every student is going to walk through the door with something. So that remains to be a challenge with BYOT. So I just wanted to show some of share some of that data with you. I thought it was interesting, and we'll be tracking that type of data as we keep moving forward about who's bringing things in. We may be able to show some of this with free and reduced lunch as well to see if we have inequities in that area. So bringing this all together, everything that we've talked about up to this point, the core of what's driving this from a monetary standpoint is our technology levy. Our technology levy is helping us keep things current, cycle of life for equipment. We have some needs that everybody doesn't get to see, all the wonderful bells and whistles type of things that you see when you walk in the classroom, like the infrastructure that makes everything run. Our servers are at a point where we need to be thinking about virtualizing our servers for many different reasons. So that's an infrastructure project that we have on the very short horizon here. Wireless expansion is just what we need to do. Everything is wireless. Everything from the next thing down is our security cameras. Well, our security cameras are wireless. And there's a huge growth. I'm going through a project right now where we're doing a security audit in all of our schools, and we're looking at a significant expansion in security cameras in our schools beyond what we put in here in the past couple of years. And then, of course, support for all of this. Staff development, Nate and Angela standing here telling you about all the work that they're doing. And then technology operations is all funded out of this technology levy. All of the people that fix the things, get them ready for people to use. So our technology levy is up this fall. This is just a graphic that I had presented before. This is kind of a summation of our technology plan in the district in our 4 buckets. And many of the things that Nate and Angela talked about, infrastructure, communications, teaching and learning, all of that, staff development is all encompassed in that technology levy. This is a graph that you've seen before as well. I'm not going to dwell on it. This is the yellow bars are the technology levy from 2007 to 2014. It's based on net tax capacity, so we peaked out at 2012, and then we started to go down a little bit because of net tax capacity. However, the blue line is the costs of the support salaries and benefits that have been added into that. So you can see, as we're looking at this upcoming year, 2014, we have the least amount to work with. So as we're talking about going out for technology levy, we are talking about an increase, because just the nature of what's happening around us, we are going to need to increase that levy. So we've already met with Sarah Thompson, our district communications coordinator. We're looking to have an event in the early fall. The last time that we did a technology levy, we did a technology showcase here at the high school, invited the public in to see all the different things that we were doing with technology and what we were doing with the funds that they had given us. We're going to be looking at what date and location we'll be doing that on, and so an announcement will come probably later in the summer, early fall, when we have that all figured out. So, any questions?
Small road show up to Lenox might be in order as well, just to show those folks what we're doing with technology as well.
Sure, yep.
Thank you, Tom. And Nate. And Angela. Next item on the agenda is the 2014 preliminary budget report. Sandy. And then Sandy will also stay on for the health and safety annual report to MDE.
And before I go on with the summary of the 2014 budgets proposal, which is in draft form at this point, which will be brought before the board for approval at the next board meeting by June 30th, which I think the next board meeting is June 24th. Okay. And before we move on to the summary page, a lot of these budget assumptions were recommended by the Finance Advisory Committee, updated with current legislation, which currently passed, bringing our formula allowance a little bit higher than what was projected during our Finance Advisory Committee, so that was increased slightly. Other than that, we do have an introductory summary, which I gave to the board as part of the budget book, which shows how we came up with the budgets. Other than we did add a few staff to this budget from the current year, one being a dean, one being a FTE to help out with the scheduling in the high school, as well as a half of a social worker at the middle school, and one FTE for the first grade at Aquila. With that in mind, this is the results of the budget for 2014, as well as the fund balance estimate at this point in time. And looking at the general fund budgets, total general fund revenues budgeted proposal for fiscal year 2014 is at $51,070,668, and the total general fund expenditure budget is at $52,397,894. And this is broken down, of course, between restricted fund balances. I'm sorry, the summary page. It's a budget summary. It reflects exactly.
Thank you.
Page 5.
While we're getting there, I say, so this is the second year in a row that we're spending more than we're bringing in for the year, so we're dipping into fund balance again.
That's correct.
And obviously we can't keep doing that at some level, but I guess we're afforded that because we've had an opportunity to raise it to about 5.5%. Is that where we're at roughly? Our fund balance.
Yeah, about 5.5% to 6% at this point. And yes, as Jim mentioned, we do dip into our general fund unreserved fund balance or unassigned fund balance by close to $1.1 million, bringing it from $4.4 million to $3.3 million. And this is keeping the assigned fund balances stable, as well as the non-spendable stable, which, this is based on unaudited numbers, which when we get to the audit, we will determine what the actuals due to the fund balance, which may or may not be different than what's showing at this point. And looking at the restricted fund balances, we have mainly it's the health and safety and operating capital, as well as the basic skills. It does change slightly for the operating capital, bringing it up slightly since our revenues have exceeded our expenditures for a slight amount, but keeping everything else stable with the basic skills, as well as staff development. Normally what we have with staff development is we normally have carryover from the prior year, which we have allowed for discretionary spending at the buildings. Health and safety is always something that makes up for itself. We levy for it 2 years in advance, and it doesn't always coincide with the actual expenditures, so we end up making up for it 2 years down the road. So that's why you're showing a negative at this point, based on the estimates of the fiscal year 2013 fund balance. And looking at the other funds, the revenues and expenditures bring the fund balances to the food service is basically remaining mostly stable, as there was a proposal which was approved at the last board meeting for increases in lunch prices. The community education fund is basically remaining pretty stable, going up just slightly to $411,247. Debt service fund, which is basically levying for our Our payments for our bonds, which includes principal and interest, which we know, and which we levy for every year, brings our fund balance to close to $2.5 million. And that eventually makes up for itself too, because eventually the state doesn't levy as much as what your bond payments are to take back some of that fund balance at some point, coming to a debt service excess payment.
So Sandy, on the debt, going back to the previous section, on the debt service fund, the fiscal year 13 revised number, can you just comment on why that number is so much lower than the next year and then so much lower than the revenue budget? So that under the expenditures, it's showing around 5 million.
Yes, and last year, or this current year, we found that we didn't levy for the OPEB bonds, which we are levying for this point, or not levying for, but budgeted for the OPEB bonds, which we didn't have in our budgets last year. So we're putting it in our budgets, which is basically a revenue and expense neutral. However, we want to show it and reflect it in our budgets, which wasn't reflected this year.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Which has no effect on the fund balance, but just wanted to reflect it properly.
Just one question. I may have lost touch of this issue, but there was some uncertainty about calculating some of the changes in the law, and it was related to the localized equity revenue. There were still some uncertainties. Has that all been resolved, or do we still have some uncertain calculations from the state?
And that's why we will be bringing to the board tonight the operating referendum resolution, which, it's being recommended to us at this point by our financial advisors to bring that forth to the board. It's still in the legislature is still discussing what the absolute details are between the location revenue, equity revenue, and the referendum revenue. But it appears at this point in time that what we are proposing is going to remain true to what the legislature might, if that's what we're referring to.
Yeah, Sandy, so I understand that we're adding a dean at the middle school in this budget. We're adding a half a social worker at the middle school, which brings the middle school to one full-time social worker. They've had a half of one for special ed. Now they will have half a social worker for other students. And then we're adding one FTE for first grade at Aquila.
That's correct.
And we haven't had to do that formal budget cutting process because we've been able to use our fund that we've built up. How does this budget affect class sizes going forward? K through 12, do we project them to be roughly the same as they've been, higher, lower? What is that assumption?
Yeah, I don't have the actual analysis in front of me, but my understanding is we're putting these additions in place in order to remain things as stable as possible, and on average.
And the enrollment assumption that you used, is that the same as we used for last year's budget, or have you assumed more enrollment?
Yeah, the Finance Advisory Committee actually increased it to reflect the last few years, which has been actually, right now, the Finance Advisory recommended 5,100 weighted average daily memberships, but in the last few years, like last year, we had 5,140. The prior year before that, we had 5,120. So it is still a little bit less than the last few years, but it is more in line with what the actuals were the last few years.
Thank you, Sandy.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
You're going to report on the MD.
And every year, Tom Morse, who isn't able to be with us tonight to present this, comes forth to the board to get the health and safety budgets approved, which is an MDE, Minnesota Department of Education requirement in order to approve the health and safety projects, which we can levy for. And I did give the board some detail tonight as far as what projects this reflects, and I did adjust it a little bit slightly than what was provided in the packet last week. But basically, this is the budgets that need to be approved, fiscal year 2013, which is in the year that we're in right now and ending. So the projects that are listed are the projects that are more than likely going to happen for 2013. We will be doing a reconciliation between the budgets and the actuals that are actually spent to determine what the actual expenditures are, which will be reflected or adjusted in the levies in the future. Fiscal year 2014 is proposed budgets for our next year's budgets and proposed projects for approval that we will be bringing to the state and putting to the state for approval, as well as fiscal year 2015. We always have to go in this 3-year process of getting approval for potential projects for the budgets for the 3-year period. And a lot of these projects that you will see are projects that are required of us to do by other agencies. We have a lot of, testing of certain things that need to happen at particular times, which Tom Morris, our health and safety coordinator, has worked with these different agencies to make sure what we need to do each year in order to get this done properly. There is a few things in fiscal year 2014 budget in which we're going to be dealing with a couple of areas of getting some things in place to get some asbestos out again, which isn't a concern at this point, but they just recommend that it would be a good practice to take that out to just in case it gets exposed for some reason. But there is no concern for it at this point. Other than that, that's all I have for this, and once this gets approved, this will then be sent to the Minnesota Department of Education for approval at the end of this month.
Questions? Thank you, Sandy. We are now down to our action items. First item is the approval of the annual health and safety report, which Sandy has just presented. It is recommended that the board approve the health and safety budget to be submitted along with the minutes of the September 24th, 2012 school board meeting that approves second reading of policy 807 to the Minnesota Department of Education by July 20, 2013. Motion to approve? Moved by Joe. Second? Second by Ken. Thank you. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. 6-0 vote. Next is the approval of the resolution calling for an operating referendum in the fall of 2013. It is recommended that the school board approve the resolution calling for the intent to hold an operating revenue authorization election in 2013 as presented. The resolution is to be read aloud by the clerk. And Joe, if you would read that, thank you.
Resolution relating to conducting a referendum revenue authorization election in 2013. Be it resolved by the School Board of Independent School District number 283, State of Minnesota as follows. 1, the board hereby declares its intent to hold a referendum revenue authorization election in 2013 pursuant to Minnesota statutes 126C.17.
Now we'll have some discussion, then we'll do the vote. Or do you have to continue reading the whole thing? Nobody has yet, so we'll do that now. Okay. The motion presented by Joe now needs a second. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Jim. Okay. Joe?
The motion for the adoption of the foregoing resolution was duly seconded by Jim Yarosh, and upon roll call vote being taken thereon, the following voted in favor thereof. Okay, so at this point I will call the
Before you call the roll, let me call for a discussion, okay? All right, any discussion?
Maybe Sandy, you could explain. As I understand it, the legislature gave some districts, or all districts, who have operating referenda a little more. I know we were at the max, and this allowed more room, so you could collect more per pupil, and maybe you could expand on that.
Yeah, and this was the question that Julie was referring to earlier, where the legislation gave location equity aid, I believe is what it's called, where it deducts it from the actual operating referendum, which we will have to probably get approved. I'm assuming. The details are not quite here yet as far as what we need to do. But what this provides is, for those of us with the cap, an extra opportunity to now have that referendum ability to go out for another operating referendum, because now it's taken away from the operating referendum into the location aid. But it provides that opportunity now, because now we can go to our cap again, which we still have, we'll have the ability to do.
So there was some legislation that now would count against our cap, that for this location adjustment that does not go back into school, that gets transferred elsewhere, those funds?
It gets transferred out of the operating capital into the location equity revenue.
So our money's going to the state? So I guess I'm still a little confused on that then. So
Yeah, there's different parts to all of this. What happened is they gave us the authority to recognize location equity revenue. And recognizing this location equity revenue is moving it, converting it from operating referendum revenue to location equity revenue. But by doing that now, it has taken some of our referendum revenue and moved it to operating equity revenue, which is leaving us now the ability to be able to go out for an operating referendum up to our cap, because our cap still remains the same.
So does that give you a net increase then on general fund dollars? Will it give you a net increase, or is it taking away out of the general fund, just allowing us to get back to the cap to net out? No, it's increasing.
If our operating referendum now goes to the voters and is approved, that will give us additional general education revenue.
That makes sense.
Julie?
But we've talked somewhat so far about other referendums. The reason to do this is just, I mean, I'm not certain yet I want to go out for this, but the reason to do the resolution now is just so that we get it done in time should we decide to go out for this referendum. So
That's correct. There was simply a time limit put on it. This had to be done if we were to do it. We haven't decided to do it, but if we are, the legislature put a time limit of June 30 on this, and so we thought we would pass it tonight, just in case it is something we need.
It gives us the flexibility to decide if we have to do it or you lose it. So again, this is just voting to keep our options open. And there'd be forthcoming more financial impact amounts and tax impact, obviously, before we would vote on it.
Yes.
On whether to actually go out.
Okay. Further discussion? Okay, roll call vote. Joe?
Roll call vote, we'll start with Morrison,
Yes.
Richardson,
Yes?
Gores,
Yes.
Schweitzer. Yes. Yarosh.
Yes.
Tatalovich, yes. So I have a vote of 6-0 in favor. So do I need to read this back in any way, or have we recorded the resolution as it should be stated? Okay, Cindy's giving me the thumbs up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Final item on the action agenda is the approval of the superintendent of schools contract for Robert Metz. It is recommended that the school board approve the resolution to approving the employment contract between Independent School District 283 and Robert Metz, Superintendent of Schools, effective July 1, 2013, as presented. Motion to approve?
So moved.
Nancy has moved it. Second? Jim has seconded. Any discussion?
Yeah, there's some discussion. This is such an odd way of going about this. I've got to take a breath here. I just want to be clear that what we have is a superintendent contract. Has Mr. Metz agreed to it and signed it?
Yes.
And the letter of agreement that resolves the issues regarding the principal rights that he had because he's been with us for a long time, has that also been agreed to and signed by Mr. Metz?
It's been signed, it's also been signed by the member of the Principals Association, Les Bork.
Okay. I suppose there's a lot that could be said about the contract, but what I want to talk about is we did a long search process that was very intense in May, looking for our next leader. The school district is positioned very nicely after the great leadership of Dr. Bowers, and I was very impressed with the candidates that we had the privilege of meeting and interviewing, and I really think public education is in great shape. That having been said, I was so delighted that Mr. Metz kind of blew it out of the park in his interviewing process with us. He has been with us for a long time. He's done great work with us, and he clearly showed to me that he is ready for this next step. And not to steal Julie's words, but I think she once said that you pick a leader at a time and in a place and with what you need, and he is the leader I believe that we need at this time and in this place. He has a curriculum master's degree. He has been with us and showed great leadership at Aquila. He's been with us and shown great leadership at the high school. He knows us. He knows education. He cares about our students, and has the vision and the leadership, I think, to take us from this great position we're in to the next level. So I am very excited that he was willing to be a candidate. I'm very pleased that he did really well in the process, and I'm delighted that we have worked with him to find a contract that we can all agree to. I think it's a very fair contract for the leadership role that he will fill as superintendent. I think it recognizes some of the things we've tried to do in our contracts in terms of the future and limited tails and yet keeping our superintendents with us. So I am delighted and will strongly support voting for this contract and employing Mr. Metz as our next superintendent.
And I echo all of your thoughts. I think I'm very excited about this decision, and even as we are sad to see Dr. Bowers go, it's wonderful to be so excited about your successor. And so I wanted to thank our community members, the staff and students in our schools and our community ed and all of our programs, parents and other community members who came to events and submitted forms with comments. As we said throughout the process, each of the board members got copies of each and every one of those, including from the public forums, which are the last items in the day. Cindy and I think with Sarah's assistance made sure all copies were made, and within an hour or so we had those for our deliberations. I read through every single one of them, and I believe my colleagues did too, and I found them to be very helpful. I had forgotten as much that element, how important that was. We did it a different way 9 years ago, but that was a very important element. So it just, again, was evidence to me of the strong community involvement that's critical to a successful school district, and I wanted to thank everybody who filled out even one of those little forms because they were very helpful.
We have a motion? We have a discussion? Anybody else?
It'd be good to say something.
Yeah.
It'd be good to say something.
Ken? Okay. All right. Joe? Yeah.
I liked what Nancy and Julie said. I'm with that. Rob's the man.
Okay.
We're all very excited. It's a bit anticlimactic, but it's good to get the contract done. But and we're happy that Rob's enthusiasm and his experience to be able to hit the ground running, and that is a nice factor, is that he already knows a lot of people and will be able to charge right ahead. So, and again, and thanks to Dr. Bowers for her leadership for the last 9 years.
I echo all of what you've said, and knowing him from Aquila and watching him as he's grown when he moved over to the high school and all the great programs he's put in place, he's just a fantastic choice that we've had. And the others were really good candidates also, but as you said earlier, for the time and the place that we're at, he's the best one.
As most everyone knows, and this is echoing a lot of the words, but this was a national search that we did. We had 2 people come from Illinois. We looked around the country for a candidate, and Rob came out clearly ahead. This was a unanimous vote of the board, and it's really appreciated the hard work that went into it. And I do want to also echo what Julie said. It's rare, excuse me, that you get from the community over 200 responses early on in the process, and then as we went through each evening in the final 3, that the community came back. Everybody filled out forms on each of the candidates. There were just hundreds of responses, and it was greatly appreciated, and we did read through every one of them. So again, it was an exciting process, and it's great to have the backing of the entire community for Rob Metz. So with that, all those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. You have a 6-0 vote. That takes us down to communications and transmittals. Does anybody have anything tonight? Okay. Joe, go ahead.
So I'll let somebody else maybe talk about graduation. I had a great time at graduation. I also went to the GED graduation, and that was excellent as well. I did want to mention a couple things about Peter Hobart. So first thing, I always like to talk about the IB exhibition because I love it. Every time I go, whatever school I go to. This time was a little different for me because I went to the in-school version because I couldn't go to the presentation version that occurs in the evening. And, you know, I saw the same great level and depth in all of these presentations. But the other thing that I got to see through this process in the school was to see the teachers interact with the students who are presenting and ask them really tough questions about if they've thought about the subject in this way or they've thought about it in another way. One of the presentations was about North Korea, and the students had a view about how to deal with North Korea, and the teacher really challenged them on their views based on the history of the Korean conflict, and I thought it was great. So next time, hopefully, I can see both and see them add those items into their presentations at night. The other thing I want to talk about was the end-of-year picnic at Peter Hobart today. So obviously today was the last day of school. Finally, we've got some good weather, so the kids were outside and playing. There was also some hip-hop dancing in the gym. I did not participate in that at all. I did talk to the principal, Shelley Nielsen, a little bit, and she mentioned and pointed out the tree that they've planted near the entrance to commemorate the students who passed away at Lilydale Park. And, you know, the other thing I want to say is, you know, my provocative statement for the night, I saved it to the end here. And someone who was kind of close to what happened brought this up. You know, Peter Hobart School has existed for since 1967. I think I looked it up after talking to this person. And Peter Hobart died, the person Peter Hobart died, I think 50 years ago. It was the son of somebody who served on the school board, contracted an illness in graduate school, and they named the the community decided to name the school after him. And one of the people who was talking to me today said, I think it might be a good idea to consider, renaming the school after the victims of this tragedy. The other thing that would do is kind of put a face on how much our community has changed because of, how diverse it is. Renaming the school after the victims of this tragedy would really kind of show, how much St. Louis Park has changed and really put a face on that as well. So I thought that was a very interesting idea, something that we should consider.
Yeah, I would say, I was at a couple of the fundraising efforts for Peter Hobart, and they were really a delight. And one of them was at the Roller Garden. Actually, families were there and bonded and having some fun in the midst of their sadness. And I thought that is sort of what that grief process is like. It's very mixed. There's a fundraiser at the West End for Peter Hobart on June 15th from 6:30 to 9:30. It's sort of a family-oriented musical event as part of Parktacular that I'll just tell people about. Shifting gears a tad, today was the last day of school, and I am very impressed with the students that came tonight to be honored because, they probably had other opportunities to do tonight, and hopefully they got there once they left us. And as Joe said, graduation on the football field, which was a delight. I hope we have many more there, but we'll see. But it really was well set up and well attended, and it was misty and it was a little chilly, and yet it was so fun because the balloons were flying and the joy was in the air, and people were talking about how much loss this particular senior class has had, and I think their compassion and empathy skills are highly developed as they leave us, and yet they also were talking about their future. So life is both and that is very clear to us this year in St. Louis Park and with our graduating class, who I'm very happy that we have launched off to their next chapters of their lives.
The last thing I'd like to talk about is there was a memorial service for Mohammed Fofana on Sunday that a number of us attended, and it was one of the most touching things I've ever been to. There were a lot of dignitaries there, but it was the family and the touching tribute to Mohammed, I thought was best expressed in the letter to his mother. And it was just one of the most touching things that I have ever seen. And the entire ceremony was done with taste and decorum, and just to be a part of it was just touching, and to meet the family and to be a part of it was really great. I'd also like to echo Nancy's words on graduation. The class of 2013 is launched. And the class of 2014, the wall has already been painted over. They are already on their way. They are launched also as the new seniors, and that's always a lot of fun. So I love that wall. I love the way the students express themselves on it, and we're looking forward to another great year. Julie?
I should have said this earlier, but just sort of on the general value of education. I missed many of the events of the last few weeks because I had both a vacation and business travel, but education came up in both of them. When I was traveling in Cusco, Peru, and hiking the Inca Trail, or at least a day's worth of it, which was plenty. The people in that region, in fact, the majority of Peruvians speak Quechua as their first language, and in the far highlands, the quality of education and the access to education can be very minimal. So it did come up a lot, just appreciating the quality of education we have, but it also came up, my minimal Spanish was fairly workable because Spanish, to most of the people we've talked about, was their second language as well. And then they were also, many of them using English, which was their third language. And so the value of language, which we've implemented across our district, is very important. on my other trip, which was Germany and business, we were looking at a vocational education aspect of the German educational system. And we heard repeatedly, they start English fairly early. To graduate from their full high schools, their gymnasium, you have to study 2 foreign languages and meet some level of proficiency. Being bilingual was a non-entity, it was not significant there because everybody was bilingual. You only became accomplished if you had 3 or preferably 4 languages. Then you'd stood out. You could speak 4 languages well. That was pretty amazing. But 2, 3, that was everybody. So I remain committed to making as many of our students bilingual as possible in the many ways that we have for learning languages, to at least being familiar with another language. And, I now intend to add German to my struggling repertoire because it was so frustrating when you can't communicate with somebody. It reminded me again of those barriers, and I hope that we can break down as many of those as possible. So I didn't mean to jump in at the end, but decided now was the time I needed to say those.
On that note, it has been an exciting year. We will be back in 2 weeks, and then we're going to take a little bit of time off, but it has been an exciting year to see this class launched. It's always exciting for us, and to hand out those diplomas is the highlight of the year. So we're grateful to all our students, and thank you, board, for another great year. With that, a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Nancy, second by Julie. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
6-0 vote. We are adjourned.